All right, some things happened last week. I don't know if you were privy to what happened, but at some point up this giant tweet train, things were going on, okay? People were saying LiveView's great. Brian Florence was saying, I don't really like that. And then it went on for like a really long time. Even Ryan Winchester got in on this one. Everybody was flopping on and flying, and even Jose got in to all of this. And it's a very, very long tweet thread. So we're going to go through that because then afterwards, Jose, the creator of Elixir, comes in and actually does a whole bit and writes a whole article. So I think we kind of need, okay, we can't do that. We're just going with this. So we're going to have to set a little bit of the context and then we're going to go, okay? So we're just going to go right up on tippity top, all right? On the tippity top of several tweets. Remix tagline is build better websites. But this last week's discourse shows that almost none of you actually care if your work is garbage. Ooh, dang, that's crazy. That's crazy take, Ryan. As long as it got a couple guys Lambos and you get a paycheck. My motivation is lower than ever. Web sucks and you're proud of it. Okay. I mean, I think you should want to build good websites. I don't think you have to use Remix to build good websites. There's great HTMX websites out there that have all the interaction. Sometimes I feel like the general discourse of the web is you show a website that doesn't do something right, and then your inverse is to say, see, I told you this framework sucks. And maybe, just maybe for a second, we could like invert this whole argument and say, hey, maybe you got a bit of skill issues. You know what I mean? Maybe you got a bit of skill issues. Or two, maybe the person just didn't want to try. You know what I mean? All right, LiveView Love is part of this. It can't break through its ceiling. I can break any LiveView app in seconds. I don't know how true this is, and it totally depends on how much they attempt to hook into the hooks. I don't know what LiveView offers, but HTMX offers everything you effectively need. So, like say on a if you go and request, you can actually put in like a nice throbber. So you know, like how a couple weeks ago everyone was freaking out about Hotwire, where you'd press an event and just you get a thin box and nothing would happen, and then like 2 seconds later it'd pop in with all the data. Like in any of these frameworks, you can just put like a throbber in there. You can get a SVG throbber as a loading state and just have that throb. And then after it throbs, it goes and does some good stuff. Busted it using the back button. So then someone says, here you go, good luck. 1 moment later, busted it using the back button. If I can find the root cause, but it looks like it just got some instructions to change the node that no longer existed. All right, got owned. And it keeps on going, blah, blah, blah. So you can see tensions are building. People are getting angry, okay? People be getting angry. Then it goes on, and these two are arguing over here. And then Ryan Winchester goes on and broke the app in seconds, and people getting angry. So I'm not going to go through all of that. Anyways, we'll go to this one. Dug in deeper. I have no idea. Let's see. Had no idea anything was draggable, and I didn't have any MP3s on my computer to upload before. Notice it uses sortable.js to drag and drop. This means the UI state is driven by the DOM manipulation outside of LiveView. Somebody sent me a Trellix dumb mini Trello that drove the UI through a WebSocket drag and drop, and it was super janky. Since LiveBeat uses sortable and syncs in the background, it avoids jank. I'd be calling this bailing on LiveView's model, though. So I would actually not be calling this bailing on LiveView's model. I think this is exactly what you do. This is like the perfect reason why we give you these controls, is that on any of these server-driven frameworks, at some point you need a little bit of client-side like updating to make it nice. So dragging and dropping is a perfect example. It's on HTMX website as well. You know, perfect example of like when you want to break into client-side behavior. This is the ceiling I'm talking about. I think this is an artificial ceiling that you've made up. That's like saying that you can only program things in React. You cannot do anything outside of that for Remix. Any logic existing outside of a React component is breaking its ceiling. And that would be kind of like, that'd be kind of nutty. That would be a inappropriate usage of a ceiling. So I don't want to see that, right? I would consider that like just a bad argument. Do you think HTML and the entire web ecosystem that exists will go out of date? I don't know. I don't think anything new will come and replace it, right? And so I think making this argument is just like, it's a fundamentally bad argument. When LiveView stops becoming the source of truth, you lose composition with the rest of the system. It's difficult to compose and synchronize other random DOM libraries with each other, the UI, and server state. It's difficult to do that in React too. It's difficult to do that in anytime, because I mean, the entirety of a React application is attempting to have a client-side cache in which you're syncing with the server. That's why this happens all the time. You see it all the time. You refresh a page and all of a sudden things change. Why is that? Because they're not synced with the server. I'm sure you view it differently. These have that these mount hooks to go do any DOM manipulation you want is a feature, not a ceiling. It is a feature. It is the point. But if any web app can just go write a bunch of DOM manipulations, then I guess Express.js has no front-end ceiling either, and the concept loses all meaning. No, I just think it's I think you're just defining it incorrectly. To me, the ceiling is anytime you stop using LiveView to drive UI updates and to do something else. I still think this is just a bad definition. This app does a great job of avoiding network latency in favor of separate abstractions to drive those DOM updates, so I can't find any jank. Yeah, I didn't say I didn't say I'd find jank though. I said I'd break it, and I did. I'm actually super happy with how much y'all care about getting rid of jank too. The only difference here, I suspect, is that I view using something like Sortable.js instead of something built in Livewire is a ceiling. I know, but okay, so let me invert this one for you. So does that mean anytime you have a library that's made outside of React and then you have some sort of React shim to make it work with React, would that also be bad? So is Charts.js bad because it's not actually React.js? It's actually just an integration with something that manipulates the DOM, which is actually what people do? So is that a ceiling of React? Do you have to build everything in React for it to be React only? Like, I just think that I think it's a fundamentally poor argument, right? Because there's plenty of JavaScript libraries that interact with React, and we just call that okay because it has the word React dash. So if you had LiveView dash in which you didn't really notice it went to the DOM, does that make it now part of LiveView? I just think that it just feels weak to me. That's all. It's just not a good argument. Okay, so now that we know that, now let's back it up. We've heard the arguments. Let's go and read this thing now. All right, the web apps have a client and server state plus real-time live view. So this is from Jose, creator of Elixir. Now that we got the context, we kind of generally know what was going on. We didn't read all the tweets because there's a lot of like, and I didn't want to talk about those ones. Recent discussions around client-side and server-side frameworks have brought up some misconceptions about state handling in web applications. This article aims to address them with some examples and go in a bit more detail how LiveView in particular deals with state in real time. You know, I always feel like LiveView is my ultimate end. Like, I know it's going to happen maybe at some point, but I first have to learn Elixir, and then it's going to happen. I just feel like at some point it has to happen. Is that everybody's eventual end state is LiveView or Laravel? I feel like it's LiveView or Laravel. Like, that's just what ends up happening. All devs slowly slide towards it, and you can't help it. Elixir for the win, yeah. Most web applications have a state on the server in the shape of a database, at least. If we assume a web application is not sending updates to the client as they happen, as soon as you render the page in the browser, the page you are seeing may be out of date. Fair and factual. Someone may have added a new comment to the blog post, or even the author has updated it with an errata. Many times, telling the user to refresh the page to get the latest version is fine. Other times, you may want to update the page in the web in real time. Yeah, I think that Twitter has like a little like, hey, there's X amount of new tweets. Do you want to see them? For example, if you have an application called Hot Sales, which sells a limited amount of items with discount prices every hour, you probably want to update the availability of the items as they change. Fair and factual. Even then, it is still important to understand that client information is always out of date. Even if the user got a server update saying that a few items are available and the user immediately clicks on buy, there is no guarantee this was successful without acknowledgement from the server. Okay. Everyone gets the idea, I assume. This is pretty simple. This is pretty simple, straightforward stuff. This has an implication on both client and server code, regardless if client-side or server-side. For example, if you decide to add optimistic UI updates to this experience, you probably don't want to say, you bought it, while you wait for the server. Telling a user they bought something and then soon after tell them that they actually did not could be quite frustrating. Instead, your optimistic UI should stick with something more neutral, such as, we are reserving your product. Okay. It's almost as if with server or client-side frameworks, you have to have client-side state that's separate from the server, and there's no way around it. It's almost like if you had a framework that drives everything from the source of truth and then gives you hooks into the client to ensure that you can have this client-side state. That sounds fairly ideal. I don't know. The Hot Sales web application also requires care on the server and database sides. Since most web applications have multiple servers talking to a single database, you may have data races. For example, if you write this pseudocode on the server, if product available, product sold to product user. It may happen that between checking the product is available and selling it, it may have already sold out. You need to use atomic operations, transactions with isolation levels, and similar to tackle these problems correctly. Yeah, sucky problems. Transaction, that one. While not all problems are this complex, thankfully, there is still a lot. There is a lot we could discuss, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. The important to keep in mind for now is that if you have data in the web application that you can read and update by different actors, you need to consider the data/page in the client before may be out of date. Okay. Yes. We all agree with all this state, right? Nothing here is unusual. So far, we talked about client state from the point of view of being out of date compared to the server. However, the majority of web applications also have its own client-side state, even if they don't include a single line of JavaScript. So for me, the client-side data or the client-side state is where I find most difficulty to exist. And it's not because UI programming is hard, but it's because you have to have a client-side cache that can sync and understand the server and remain in sync with the server and then update the client-side experience. I find that to always be a huge source of bugs. And so the larger that cache is, the harder mo cache, mo problems is how I generally think about it. Because the sooner you can get to just the source of truth, you just have less problems, right? This problem hasn't changed since the late 90s. It really has not changed since the internet was invented. Or it really hasn't changed since even just computers requesting resources have changed. Boo. You boo yourself, Warren Buffering. And so it's does any of that stuff change? No, it hasn't. The simplest client state we can think about is in the form of inputs. Imagine you wrote a blog post and now you want to edit it. As soon as you change any character in the post, you have a state in the client that has never been seen before by the server. And once again, depending on the application, you may want to carefully consider the implications of client-side state. Regardless if you're using a client-side or server-side framework. For example, it could be a disaster if two people are editing the same blog post at the same time, and then changes of one of them end up immediately erasing the others. To deal with this, you have to implement Git, by the way. So to deal with this, you're just going to have to simply have a add, delete, modified algorithm added. I'd suggest the ORT strategy leads to less recursive conflicts. And then on top of that, when a merge conflict happens, you make somebody solve it with a bunch of dashes. Isn't that fun? Wouldn't that be just a good time? Web dev is so much fun. Dude, it just makes me happy, isn't it? It just makes me happy. When you open up a post for edition, you include a version in the form. When the form is submitted, you check the version is still the same. If so, you proceed. If not, you tell the user they were not working on the latest version, as done by Git. Uh-oh. Git mentioned. I told you I could see into the future. Here we go. ORT strategy. If possible, you can detect in real time someone else is editing the page, which would be trivial in Phoenix with multi-party presence mechanism. Then you can let the user know about the potential conflicts quite early on. Once again, there's a lot to explore here. For text editing, you could use a collaborative editors or explore local first principles. Oh my gosh. Warren Buffering. Did you hear that? He's getting better at reading. I didn't hear a lot of stutter. Shut up, Peck. Word buffering, did you see that? Local first. Word buffering, local first. Let's see. Trying to explain a three-way merge to an end user would be the first step in my retirement. It's fair. The overall idea is that clients have their own state. For offline apps, this state changes even when disconnected, and at some point, this state needs to be synchronized with the server or other clients. To the server, it doesn't really matter if the state is a consequence of typing into an input or dragging and dropping an item. Fair and factual. Enter real time. Given that web applications have both client and server state, client-side and server-side frameworks need to deal with both. State is intrinsic part of the problem. Therefore, it must be intrinsic part of the solution. Ignoring how state changes on the server or ignoring how state changes on the client will lead to poor user experiences. Restricting a stack from leveraging any of these states would be an artificial limitation that does not benefit anyone who wants to write production applications. It's also worth saying that even if you share programming languages between client and server code, such as JavaScript, Clojure, Gleam, etc., which is definitely a plus. They often are working on fundamentally different problems. A client needs to concern itself with the DOM manipulation, syncing the latest state from the server, etc., while the server needs to reconcile changes from multiple clients, perform authorization, guarantee data consistency at the database level, and more. With this in mind, let's talk about real time. For simplicity, sorry, there's not all these things are, The only thing you could really take from these statements so far is that the obvious problem is that we have a definition problem, and that's really the problem that we were talking about with Ryan Florence, talking about the ceiling and saying, hey, if you use LiveView, if you're doing anything other than LiveView, this is a problem. Which is also funny because they call React a library. So if your application can only use React to drive any sort of updates, is it a library or is it a framework? Is it a library or is it a framework? It's obviously at that point it most certainly becomes a framework. Most certainly. But more so, I do actually like this one thing that kind of was pulled out right here, that kind of a miss right here, which is that programming languages actually share. They can share domains, meaning that what you could program in, say, Gleam, you could program in JavaScript. The solution may look differently, blah, 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 but the point of using one language over the other is that a lot of these languages are designed to solve a specific problem. And so that means you could actually get a significant kind of level up by changing the language you use all the time. Just a little fun little side fact. All right. Now let's talk about real-time. For simplicity, let's consider a real-time web application to be one where the server sends updates to the client at will, and those updates happen on the server with a reasonable amount of time, a few seconds, but not minutes. Okay, near real-time. Near real-time. Not all features in an application need to be real-time for the purpose of this discussion. Let's go back to the blog post editor example. Using a collaborative editor would be a fantastic feature to add and improve user experience. Changes across the users are now automatically synchronized. However, what happens if two users also change the category of the blog post while editing? Merge conflict. So much merge conflicting. Your application likely uses a select or drop down to choose categories. While you could automatically synchronize changes to the drop down across users, is that the best user experience? How would the user feel if they see the value of a drop down changing out of nowhere with no explanation? Yeah, I mean, this is why real-time and collaborative. Oh my goodness, you scared me. Thank you for the bacon. That was very lovely of you. She came in so stealthily, so quiet. Yeah, then gave me bacon. Oh, it's a lovely part of the YouTube video. Thank you, Waifagen. She's lovely. She's great. Flip, keep this in. Flip, zoom in. Flip, rotate it. Go, bruh. This part's kind of interesting. I mean, it's one of the hard parts about any sort of real-time collaborative, applications. There's certain things that you just can't really change in real time with any sort of explanation. I mean, if you had Google Docs and you could see a cursor throbbing and then text starts happening, it makes sense. But if just drop downs start changing, that could feel a little bit weird. What happens if they both change the drop down at the same time? What happens if a user changes it while the other has the drop down open? A possible solution is to show a message or an indicator that the data has been changed by someone else until these changes are effectively published. It is a simple user interaction solution or interface solution for a problem with technical roots. The point I want to drive here is that the real time does not necessarily mean override the client with the latest version. It does not matter if the server is sending updates to the client in the shape of data, as the client-side frameworks typically do, or as chunks of HTML, as the server-side frameworks typically do. You need to consider how real-time updates are shown to the client. Fair. In either side. So this is actually a really good point. Whether you're doing either side, it does not matter. This is I actually really like this argument. So far, this argument's actually really good, which is there just comes points in the application that are irrelevant to whether you're using client-side or server-side. It's actually a fundamentally different problem, which is what makes somebody confused. So how do you reconcile this? If you have a push update or a server-side event into your React application or a WebSocket that something has changed, you can't just update. You actually literally have the same problem. Hello LiveView is a framework for writing rich real-time and interactive applications with server-rendered HTML written in Elixir. Man, Elixir mentioned. Somehow, it always ends with Brazil. What's going on, Brazil? Why do all roads lead to Brazil? Okay. Somehow I'm programming Lua in Vim. Somehow, every time anything cool happens, it's Elixir. What's going on? Why? Brazil mentioned. Brazil has been officially mentioned. They're playing the long game. They have been playing the long game. Gleam for the win? I don't know. I don't know Gleam or Elixir well enough to have a strong opinion. But every time I hear someone talk about Elixir, they talk about how easy it is. Even TJ, with all of his OCaml-ness, he sent me a whisper not too long ago, and I swear it was something along the lines of, I tried Elixir and got something done really fast. And then I think there was almost a hint of disappointment in TJ. That he kind of wished there would have been a little bit more docs reading and being a bit more pedantic about the problem because it just got solved and he didn't know what to do with it. He was a little bit you could almost see that he was a little annoyed with the fact that he just solved a problem really quickly. And he was just how am I supposed to read the friendly manual when I just solve these problems, chat? How'd I do? Was that a good one? To be fair, he had live docs with Ryan W. Yeah, he did. I love Elixir. Yeah, I don't know. Elixir is actually a very interesting language. One of these days, we'll do it. Since LiveView runs on the server, it naturally addresses server state and stays close to the database, but it also has abstraction for dealing with client. It is a must. With an understanding of these concepts, we can now discuss some of the implementation details within LiveView. We have just discussed that real-time applications need to consider how updates are shown to the client. Because LiveView, by the way, I don't think you have to do that in a good blog post. You don't need to do that kind of transition. You can just go right in. You can just go right into it. LiveView keeps it open, because LiveView keeps an open WebSocket long pole connection between client and server. LiveView is aware of and controls what the client has rendered, and therefore developers can decide how real-time updates are propagated and rendered within LiveView itself. And in most cases, LiveView also does a lot of work behind the scenes to guarantee those updates are cheap and performant. Without a persistent connection, resolving real-time updates on a server becomes riskier because it increases the chance you'll overlap with something the client is doing or seeing. However, we have just talked about how applications have client and server state. If there is client state, how can a LiveView manage real-time updates? In such cases, because the state is in the client, the state is in the client, we must resolve it on the client. For such, LiveView provides a client-side mechanism called hooks, which integrate into the LiveView lifecycle with the DOM, allowing developers to react to connections, disconnections, and updates in whatever way they prefer. And LiveView team has mentioned as part of their 1.0 RC announcement that integration with web components is on the roadmap too. This is actually really cool. I know web components get a really bad rap. Who here? Type 1 in the chat if you love web components. Yeah, ain't nobody's going to type 1. There's very few ones. How about this one? Type 69 in the chat if you dislike or hate web components. Tends to be a lot more people feeling a little bit stronger. I will say one thing about web components that's really nice. When you write a web component and it works, the web component works ad infinitum. You write it once, and you literally never have to think about that web component again. It will work in 5 years from now. It will work in 10 years from now. It just works forever. And so that is something that's really nice about them. Yeah, they're like a little cumbersome to work with. So I don't love how they feel, but I do love the outcome. Once you write one, you can literally take that web component and just drop it in another website, and it just runs. You know what I mean? It just works. There's something about that that's really, really nice. Shadow DOM feels weird? Absolutely. I'm not saying any of these things are good. I'm just saying I like the outcome of WebSockets. I like the idea. I don't love the programming of them. I tried the program and I had several things that would go wrong. There's all these dumb things there's lots of dumb things. Like the elements are there or they're not there depending on how the web page is loaded. Like if you first load the elements and then the script executes, then you actually get your web component plus any of the children. But if it's the other way around, the script already exists, then you get the web component but without the children. There's all these little gotchas that are super annoying about it. But once you figure out all those things and program it right, they work forever. And that's pretty nice. It's a nice little thing. The problem with web components is Googling for it gives you React docs. Ooh, damn, that's crazy. That's not good. That's not what we want. Here's the interesting part. Because LiveView was designed to tackle real-time problems, it has a strong foundation for dealing with optimistic updates too. Because ultimately, they are about synchronizing client state with the server updates. You can consider an application with optimistic updates to be a subset of a real-time one, since you only receive updates caused by your own actions. To make this practical, we've implemented one mechanism within LiveView. Let's talk about it. The need for clocks. Hey, speaking about the need for clocks, while I was on my way home, just driving along, I was reworking some of the basics to go do what Casey Moratori did, but I also made a nice little clock for the video game. Nice little clock. You know what I mean? That way we could do some nice, you know what I'm saying? I don't code and drive. Well, I wasn't driving. Anyways, we're zigging. We're getting the clocks in there. A little real-time clock, a little faux clock, and then we're going to be able to do, something with it. Clock, called it. Yeah, I was cooking clocks pick, like Easy-E. Let's see. Okay, imagine your web application has a form. The form has a single email input and a button. We have to validate the email is unique in our database and render a tiny or accordingly close to the input. Because we are using server-side rendering, we are debouncing/throttling form changes to the server. And to avoid double submissions, we want to disable the button as soon as it is clicked. Here's what could happen. A user typed hello at example. By the way, this is a valid email address until the period. I don't know if you know that, but it's a very annoying feature of email that hello at example is actually real. Hello at example dot is not considered good. A debounce kicks in, causing the client to send an event to the server. Here's how the client looks at the moment. Okay, while the server is processing this information, the user finishes typing the email and presses submit. The client sends the submit event to the server, then proceeds to disable the button and to change its value to submitting. By the way, this is like a hard problem for React as well, right? Can we all agree like this is like a world's classic difficult problem in React? There's a lot to this. You cannot press the big clock energy. You can't. Nightshade dude, stop pressing it. Regex solves it. Okay, Regex solves this. Thank you for the valid input. While the server is processing this information, the user finishes typing the email and presses submit. All right, and the client does this, submitting. Solved with start transitions. Yeah, you hope, but you got two problems there. You got an in-flight request that you have to now ignore. You know, Nick solves it. Yeah, because because the result of this check mark, what do we do? Immediately after pressing the submit, the client receives an update from the server. But this is an update from the debounce event. If the client were to simply render this a server update, the client would effectively roll back the form to the previous state shown below. Disaster. This is, let's see, a simple example of how client and server state can evolve and differ for periods of time due to the distance between them, independent of the stack. To address this in LiveView, whenever it pushes an event to the server, LiveView includes a unique identifier built from an always increasing counter, monatomic clock, aka the clock, and ties the identifier to stateful elements, your client-side state. Then LiveView proceeds to queue the server changes to these elements until it receives an update that matches the most recent identifier. Okay, I'm liking this. It's a clever way to solve this. Yeah, it's like a sequence number. It's actually pretty good. Then LiveView proceeds to queue the server changes to these elements until it receives an update that matches the most recent identifier. So it means, also just reading this, it must mean that parts of your application you can like group together. So Ryan Winchester will be able to answer this one, but you should be able to, by the way, bonjour, thank you, French Sardo. You should be able to group together parts of your application such that if the sequence number isn't the latest sequence number, it's okay because it's a different subsection. Am I correct on that one? I bet you Ryan Winchester's all stoked up about this problem. He's somewhere in there. He's working. He hears me responding to me, so he's like raging on the keyboard right now. Yes, there are different live views and components. Yep. You can tell. I can tell. Don't worry. I know what's happening. You're working right now, but you're just listening like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, I think that you're wrong in the instance. You simply check the message before I... Building rich experiences would be impossible without LiveView being aware of client-side state. Okay, that makes sense, though. I think that's really, really clever to have sequences that are also, to have a latest be a combination of sequence and area, I think is really good. All right, I think that's a really good approach to solving this problem. Super, super clever. Good job, Jose. The collection of these features is what makes it possible for LiveView application to broadcast drag and drop events to all users in real time while providing a nice experience even on 3G connections. The next step and considerations. Today, LiveView has two main interoperability mechanisms with the client. Hooks that integrate LiveView's life cycles with the DOM elements, and commands, which perform common client-side actions without the server round trip. The clock mechanism described in the previous section is used internally for several LiveView features, and it's partially exposed to the user via the loading option on push. The loading option applies and removes classes from elements, which can then react to these events. In the simplest case, you can simply use CSS to customize a given element while it waits for the server update. When using Tailwind, Phoenix includes class variants to make this trivial. Oh my gosh. Did he just mention Tailwind? Honestly, only the worst engineers use Tailwind. We are Also discussing mechanisms to expose our clock programmatically, making it easier to pre-render a component on the client while waiting on the server ACK. That's bait. That's bait right there. Note, this is already possible with hooks today. A project like LiveView can help avoid duplication in more complex cases. Near real time, simply, okay, someone says, what the hell is near real time? I use the term near real time. Near real time just simply means like within 5 minutes. That's typically what people use as near real time. They're like as close as possible, because obviously real time would be like when someone does it, it happens also within milliseconds. But if you're like in the seconds to minutes category, you're in near real time. It's also been observed in studies that manual note taking is better for truly taking in what you've noted. I would assume so, because there's a physical action to it. Usually, whenever you can tie like multiple senses together, you just tend to get better memory. I mean, typically speaking. We are also discussing mechanisms to expose our clock programmatically, making it easier to pre-render a component on the client while waiting for the server ACK. Note, this is already possible with hooks today, and in projects like LiveView can help avoid duplication in more complex cases. At the end of the day, most applications will require some JavaScript integration. As an example, an application such as LiveBeats, which allows users to start their own radio station for people to listen to in real time, requires 340 lines of JavaScript application code. That's pretty good. We target real time, 5 minutes. That's the most ideal you can get when you have millions of events. Yep, there you go. Correct. So typically real time means near real time. 500 lines of JS is too many? No, for the Doom application, it required 500 lines of code. And of those 500 lines of code, 100 of them were devoted to making WebSockets behave properly and not send messages out of order. And then I discovered there's just a single property, which I'm still emotionally produced by. I can't believe the default behavior is messages can come out of order. Like, who does this? How did that even happen? How did you even program that? I'm just so impressed by this. We don't understand the 5 minutes real time because we only have 2 users, so everything happens instantly. Correct. While Phoenix LiveView does not support all use cases, the most obvious being offline mode, and while it still requires you to bring JS libraries for managing the DOM, it packs quite a punch. By the way, offline mode is extremely difficult, and 99% of websites don't handle it either. And so I've always found that one to be a bit of a... I kind of feel like it's, when you're at a company, every company has a different set of arguments that people make that they're not making in good faith, but they're making to defeat a project. And it's different from every company, and this is one of those arguments that I think most people say, well, you can't do that because if you don't have internet, it doesn't work. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Like what, Google Docs, only if you pre-select it being editable offline works, okay, but nothing else does. It's a red herring. It's totally a red herring. Almost nobody gets it right. I can't just scroll through Twitter and make a bunch of likes, and then when I go back online, it's like, and they're liked now, right? Like, that doesn't work. You get real-time messaging, multi-party presence, client-side interoperability, fast browserless testing, uploads, monitoring, dashboards, and much more. All provided out of the box without the need for third-party dependencies or third-party services, and that's without taking into account everything else you get from Elixir and Erlang ecosystems. Phoenix LiveView is currently in release candidate for upcoming 1.0 release. Give it a try. I think this is a really good counterexample that he gave. And I really do think that I truly do think I like Ryan Florence, by the way. I hope everybody understands that I'm not here to dunk on him, but I think that this is fundamentally just a bad take. And what I mean by bad take is that every single framework cannot just exist by itself as an island. It's a combination of other things. And like I said earlier, Charts.js is a great example. Lots of websites use Chart.js for these beautiful integrations with charts, but often those integrations with charts and stuff are never done actually in React. They're always done by just DOM manipulation because you have so many little DOM elements you may be doing. And so I tend to just like doubt any of these things whenever I see it. It's just like, okay, I get it. Not everything, you can't solve all client-side interactions with server-driven UI updates. Fair, factual. But writing 340 lines of JavaScript to make a decently interactive website, like, I'm happy about that. Like, that's very little code. That's just fundamentally a much easier set of code to deal with, right? The less you have to write for custom behavior, the better. I like that. Show the website. Yeah, I don't have any. I don't have any. What's it called MP3s, right? By the way, that was like lickety split. Can we all agree? You haven't seen a website load that fast in ages. Can we all agree? Ain't nobody seen that. All right, hold on. Let me do this. I mean, this is a nice feeling website. It's a nice feeling. Like I would have no idea where all these things are coming from. All right, like look at that. That didn't look like it caused a network request. Look at that. They made a little interactive part. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Anyways. Do I have a filter on? I don't have any filters on. There you go. I mean, it's all right there. It's all being driven through WebSockets. Usually WebSocket events, they have a nice little thing. I don't have any music, so it causes a bit of a problem. I need something here. Is this just HTMX? No, it's like advanced HTMX, right? Show the WebSocket messages. Well, typically the WebSocket messages would be coming through whatever one did the WebSocket, JS WebSocket. There's this guy. That's cool. I don't want to listen. I'm not going to press listen, but okay. Yeah, it doesn't really help. Let's see. It doesn't really help to spread misleading statements in the title from faulty studios. I'm not really sure what we're talking about here. Let's see. L, do I need a way to get back to MP3s now? Yeah, apparently we need to use YouTube Downloader to. I'm not sure if they come out as MP3s. WebSockets are cool. Yeah, WebSockets are cool. I mean, generally that's just a really good experience. I don't know. I find that was a fine experience. I had absolutely no problems with that experience. And granted, like my internet's not super fast. It's not super slow. It's just fine. We could drop it into slow 3G and see the experience and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, a little bit of client side JavaScript can pretty much make most of the problems described go away. And that's the whole point of the argument. And I think that's the miss here, which is that's what people care about. It's just like, hey, like this app does a great job avoiding network latency in favor of separating separate abstractions to drive those DOM updates. So I can't find any jank. So there's no jank to be found in this app, which is cool with 340 lines of code. All right, that's a W. He does have 3G examples right here. Okay. Yeah, because I'd rather see someone with a whole bunch of, with a whole bunch of songs. It's regular 3G, not even good 3G. Nice. That's looking really good. Hey, that's looking really good for the 3Gs. That's looking really good. How much server resources, though? Half the benefit of JS is that you offload a bunch of resources to the client. I don't think you actually offload that many resources to the client. I think that you say you do, but I think you kind of artificially create this. Because, here's a good example. You have a server, doesn't matter what language. Let's pretend it's in Go, which just you automatically get 10x the scaling to JavaScript. And you decide you're going to just deliver down the HTML instead. Well, what do? You're going to go to the database, which is going to be infinitely longer than anything else you do. You get back the information. You do some string interpolation, which is rather cheap, right? So you build a couple templates, bada bing, bada boom. It runs through that. It produces out a string, sends it down. It does a bunch of logical choices based on the values that are inside of, that are inside of the data that comes back down. Then what happens? Well, you send down the client-side payload and the client-side renders. Or B, you can do something similar. You're going to go through on your server. You're going to go request the data. You're going to go through the data in the same fashion, ensuring things are on and off or in the way you want it to be. And then you're going to do JSON stringifying, which is not necessarily the same it's not the same as building a template, right? A template is a known value that's going to be coming out, whereas JSON, it builds it one little bit at a time. So there's a bunch of stuff, right? It's just different. So even arguing which one's more efficient is very, very, very difficult. It's very hard for me to understand how you could say one was faster than the other, because I have no idea. We'd have to do a lot of testing on a lot of different services to really understand which one was better. So it's very context specific, yeah. And so when someone says you're offloading it from the server to the client, I don't know if I buy that. I think it's just an argument people make. Is the server stateful now? No, it doesn't have to be stateful. Nothing about it has to be stateful. I mean, the WebSocket and all that, yeah, that's just delivering down client-side or server-side stuff. But obviously, Phoenix gives you a really good experience with keeping state and keeping live sessions going. HTMX, you don't do that. HTMX is a stateless server kind of model. So it's like, I think these arguments, I think they're arguments that are made either in good or bad faith. I don't think you can identify why they're made, but they're made and they detract from the actual problem. The actual problem is, what can you build? And can you build it reasonably? And can multiple people join in on a product and make it into something great? Or is that just not tenable? Really, because that's what we ultimately want, right? Everybody wants to be able to build nice web applications. Or by everyone, I mean actually a small subsect of the total programming community wants to be able to build, web applications that are nice, that potentially 2, 3, 4, 10, 15 people can join in and help build. And so what is the best and most flourishing way we can do that? What is going to lead to the most amount of features with the least amount of people fighting each other? That's really the question I think we're all asking ourselves. That's a fantastic, yes. It's how hard is it to maintain? Exactly. And so I think sometimes people always go and they focus on these arguments that don't actually matter, right? So when you say, well, yeah, is it more expensive to produce HTML than JSON? It's just like, I don't know. Probably depends on the JSON and the HTML. Probably depends on how many transformations. Depends on how many things are going on. I have no idea. Is it more expensive with egress? I don't know. I can't even tell with that one. Right? I don't know, because that's like a very specific problem on a case-by-case basis. I can't answer that question. Anyways, so apply a little bit more critical thought. It's, every now and then you hear this phrase. I've been hearing this phrase and I absolutely hate it. And we are laughing about this at Big Sky DevCon, which is you hear this phrase every now and then and you see it, which goes something like this. We know less about the ocean than space. Like someone literally said this phrase, and this was reported and all these kind of things. I mean, obviously the problem is that like in space, there's probably a planet that has a bigger ocean than ours. Just throwing it out there. Statistically speaking, there's probably a planet with some sort of liquid that is bigger than ours, and there's oceans in space, okay? Space oceans. So when someone says these phrases, they sound great and nice and all cool, but then when you take any sort of critical thought, you're like, okay, we're arguing completely crazy things, and none of this makes any sense. But space is fake? Facts. The name is the Primogen.